I'm going to show you how to make the Trapunto Sunflower Tissue Box cover from Kreative Kiwi. For this I'm going to be using a 5x7 hoop, 2 layers of wash away stabiliser throughout, and there's 5 hoopings. I've got my fabrics and batting cut to size along with a piece of elastic, a box of Kleenex tissues, and the box size is 11 centimetres high by 9.5 wide by 10 deep, my thread, some masking tape, my squizzers, and I've also got a little piece of card that's cut to 1 centimetre wide, and that's going to act as a little measure. I'm not going to stitch every block because they're all exactly the same no matter what size you're doing, apart from the top one. So I'm going to show you how to do the top one and join the rest in the hoop once that's been made. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, along with lots of other useful information for you, such as where I get my supplies and also some discount codes, so please do take the time to have a look. You're going to start off by hooping your 2 layers of wash away stabiliser, so place them down over the outer hoop and then push the inside frame over the top. Then we're going to pin around the top edge of our hoop to stop our stabiliser from being pulled down. So take your pin, lay it on top of the inside hoop, push it through, and then bring it back round and back through the stabiliser again, and that will anchor it. I'm going to show you how to stitch file C because it's the only one that's slightly different. Before you stitch file C, you will stitch 2 of file A, which is your front and back, and then you will stitch 2 of file B, which is your sides, and then they will all be joined in the hoop onto file C. First off, no matter which file you are stitching, you're going to load your thread into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you a placement outline for your batting. I've loaded a slightly darker colour to the one that I'm going to be using for the quilting into my machine, just so that you can see it, and I will swap that colour out in a little while. If you're doing the front, back or sides, next you will take your little piece of card that's cut to 1 centimetre wide, place it over the top, or should I say up to the top of the stitch line of the box, and then you're going to draw a line across your stabiliser. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2. Again, no matter which of the files you're stitching, you're now going to trim up the excess batting from around the edge of the stitching. For files A and B, you then take your fabric, you place your fabric up to the line that you drew, and then you tape it in place. And then you would stitch round number 3, and that would do all the quilting all over it, and there's only 3 colours to the block. So now for file C, you place your fabric over the top. It doesn't matter about the line, you're not going to bother with the line for file C, and then you're going to tape it in place, making sure that you've got your chosen thread colour for the quilting loaded into your machine. You'll then stitch round number 3. So once your stitching of round 3 has finished, if you're doing the sides, back or front, it will look like this because there will be the centre of the flower stitched as well. If you're stitching file C, then it won't have the centre stitch, because this is where we're going to create the opening to pull the tissues through. We're now going to remove the centre of the flower. You just snip. You want to make sure that you leave your stabiliser intact though. You're just going to remove the fabric and the stabiliser underneath. Make sure you get any fibres around the edge as well. You're now going to pop your hoop into your machine and you're going to stitch round number 4, and that's going to zigzag the raw edge of the centre. If you're happy that there's nothing poking through that needs trimming off, you can then stitch round number 5, and that's going to do the satin stitching and the decorative top stitching around the raw edge. So with your other blocks, when you free them from the hoop, you can remove the excess stabiliser from the back, as I've done on these. And then one by one we're going to add our panels to the top. We're going to start off with the back panel, which is this one. You will place it face down over the top, but before we do that we need to give ourselves something to align it properly, because we want all this stitching to align up between the two blocks, so that the flower part here lines up and the flower part here lines up, and of course the wavy lines as well. So today I'm going to show you the thumbtack method. So I've got some thumbtacks here, and I'm going to push these in from the back, here, 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 here and here. And when it comes through the front, it should be right spot on in place on the corner of that flower, or should I say the top of that flower. And watch you don't pierce your finger as you push them through. And now I'm going to do the same on this side. So there's my 3 pins. I'm going to do the same on the other part of the flower here. And I'm probably going to have to realign these afterwards because I can't see what I'm doing, so if they look a bit off, that's why. And I'm going to put one in the middle here, and that's just going to hold everything in place while we align things. Now we're going to take our back, and you've got 2 pieces of fabric. You've got the short piece and the long piece. You want the long piece towards the bottom of your hoop, because this long piece afterwards is going to become the channel where you're going to run your elastic to hold it underneath the tissue box. So this is the bottom end of the box. So place your panel face down and then align it with your drawing pins. You might have to stretch it a little bit, because once you remove something from the hoop, of course, it relaxes. So it's really difficult when you can't see what you're doing. It's easy to do, but just difficult when you can't see what you're up to. That's one side down. And let's just pop this middle one on as well. Okay, when you're happy that everything's in place, you can then pin your or tape your panel in place. So I'm just going to put pin in here. Make sure that you've got no pins where the stitch line is, and that's going to be on top of the border of this stitch line here. And then I'm just going to put some pins this side. When you're happy that it's all secured, you can then remove the thumbtacks. Then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 6, and that's going to stitch along here and secure the two pieces together. So I've removed the pins, and there's my join, and everything lines up really nicely. And it's these pieces here and of the flower that are the most important, of course, because if they're off you can see it. So we're now going to do the same with on the bottom here with the front. So again, place your thumbtacks in place. Place your front with the long part of the fabric towards the top of the hoop, face down, and then push your points onto the thumbtacks. And when you're happy that they're lined up, you can then pin your panel in place. I'm just going to make sure that these lines here are lined up as well, because then I know it's straight. And pop your pins in. Again, keeping it out of the way of this stitch line here. And then when you're happy that it's all lined up, remove your thumbtacks. Pop your hoop into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 7, and that's going to stitch along this stitch line here. So we're now going to add our side pieces. So I'm going to put my thumbtacks in place as I did before, trying to make sure that I get them as accurate as possible. Oops. Then I'm going to place my side panel face down with the short side of the fabric to the left, and then push it down onto the thumbtacks. And as before, I'm going to pin it in place. And the stitch line is going to be here where our thumbtacks are, so keep all pins out of the way. When you're happy, remove your thumbtacks, pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 8, and that's going to stitch down here. So I've removed the pins and that's all nicely aligned. So we're now going to do the same on the last edge. and this time our panel will go face down with the long piece of fabric here towards the left and the short towards the right. So let's start by putting our thumbtacks in. Take your panel face down and push it onto the thumbtacks. And then pin it in place, keeping your pins, of course, out of the way of the stitch line, which will be along here. Remove your thumbtacks, pop your hoop into your machine and stitch around number 9, and that's going to secure this panel and stitch along this stitch line here. So I've removed all the pins, and that's our 4th panel joined. We're now going to remove this from the hoop. So turn your hoop over. Oops, I've got some pins left in here. So turn it over, and then you're just going to trim around the edge of the stitch line, taking care, of course, not to cut any of the fabric while you cut. Now that all our panels are joined, we're now going to align the sides, and each pair here and here will align to each other, making sure, of course, that you get the very corner stitches together. And I personally prefer to baste mine, but if you prefer to pin it, or whatever method you prefer, that's entirely up to you. But for accuracy, I would go for basting. And if you're new to a machine embroidery and you don't know what basting is, it means that you're going to put a line of stitching in to hold it in place in the place of pins, and you don't need tiny stitches for this. You're just going to weave in and out and make sure that you come through at strategic points as you did aligning the parts in the hoop. And then I just go up and down, and making sure that, of course, that all my lines are matching up as I go. So I'm going to do that, and then I will be back and show you what I've done before we stitch out and join all the sides together. And if I open this out, you will see all the lines on both panels are matching up nicely. So that's all the basting done on all sides, and that's how it will be once it's all stitched. So I'm now going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch up each side, and I'm going to follow the stitch line from here all the way down to here on each side, and I've just put a little line in to guide me. I just rested my ruler on the stitch line and followed it down to the end. So once you've finished stitching your seams, check to make sure that everything's okay, and if you're happy with it, then we can now cut off all this excess fabric. So we're going to start off by clipping the corners on the diagonal. Take care, of course, not to cut your stitching. I'll do that on all four corners. And now I'm just going to cut along the side of the batting. And a good thing about scuba fabric is it doesn't fray, and it leaves a very neat edge without having to use a lining. So that's the top edge done, and we're now going to do the same on the sides. I'm just leaving a little bit more on the edge here and then just tapering in. We can now turn this out the right way. And we're going to try it on our box for size. Just insert your tissue box for a minute. Okay, so with this edge we need to make a channel to run our elastic through. So we're going to end up folding this over, and now there's two ways of doing this. You can fold it over and stitch it on your machine, or you can use a blanket stitch and do it by hand. It doesn't take very long to do. So I'm going to turn this out the wrong way again. I'm going to pop my tissue box inside. And this is going to provide me with a really good edge to fold this over and pin. I'll turn this on the side so that you can see what I'm doing. So just marrying up this edge to this edge. Just opening out the fabric on the corners, just so that it's a little less bulky when I fold it over. And you could of course use clips if you prefer. That's now ready to stitch, so I can remove the cover. And we're now going to stitch this on our machine, or by hand if you prefer. I would recommend a blanket stitch for this, though. It really is the best, and it keeps it very, very neat too. And you're going to leave a gap. And the reason why you need to leave a gap is to thread your elastic through. So I'm just going to pop two pins close together to mark the start and stop of sewing. We'll now go over to the machine. Now that that's stitched, we're now going to remove the excess stabiliser from the top, and all I'm going to do is cut a little hole in it, slip it over the tissue box itself, and that will hold it nice and firmly while I trim round the edge. You get a nice neat trim then. Take care not to cut the stitches, of course. Okay, we can now remove the tissue box. We're going to deal with the excess stabiliser around the hole now. So take some warm water and a cotton bud, dip it in and just wipe it round the edge. Turn it upside down and then pop your tissue box back inside. And we're now going to thread the elastic through. So take your piece of elastic and a safety pin. Find the opening and then thread it through. So now that it's threaded, make sure that all your corners are lined up with the box, and then you're just going to pull on the elastic until it's tight enough, but so that you can still remove it to change the box. And when you're happy with the tautness of your elastic, you're then going to tie it off. Just cut those ends, and then I'm just going to hand stitch that closed. So I'm going to take that off. You can sew it on your machine if you prefer. So I've got my needle and thread, and I'm going to blanket stitch this. So hold your thread up out of the way, push it through the two fabrics and then pull, and you want to catch your thread on the stitch that you've just made. So pull it up out of the way, catch your two fabrics and then pull, and then this loop will come and sit down on top of this thread, and it makes a very, very neat, almost invisible edge. So thread up out of the way, do your stitch through both, and then pull. Thread up out of the way, stitch through both fabrics and pull. Nearly there. I'm going to tie this off. Let's open the box. And there we have our tissue box cover. And that's our tissue box cover finished. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of new videos as soon as they're published. Do pop along to Kreative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's lots of ideas, help and inspiration there for everybody. And thank you very much for joining me. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, along with lots of other information such as where I get my supplies and some discount codes for you as well.